In my hometown of Westbridge, Maine, there was a woman everyone loved to despise. Her name was Ms. Harrow, and she served as both the elementary school custodian and the convenient scapegoat for every mishap in town. The town's elders condemned her for having borne a child out of wedlock, while the local parents castigated her for indulging her son too much, a leniency they claimed had cost him his life when the Westbridge River claimed him. For us kids, neither old-fashioned manners nor parental failings mattered as much as our unanimous agreement that Ms. Harrow was downright unattractive, and that was reason enough for our mischief. My closest companion back then was a curly-haired scamp named Calvin, already the undisputed ringleader among our group by 5th grade. He was always hatching schemes to unsettle Ms. Harrow, though nothing we did ever seemed to ruffle her. Whether we spread rumors about her questionable hygiene, released insects into the janitor's closet, or stuffed spoiled food into lockers, she simply brushed off every prank with an unruffled efficiency. We were baffled. How could the woman whose job was to clean up every kind of mess remain so utterly unfazed? In my final year of elementary school, just a week and a half before winter break, Hanukkah arrived. The Jewish kids proudly paraded their presents while the rest of us impatiently waited for our own. At that time, every kid in Westbridge was infatuated with spy gadgets, thanks in no small part to shows like Spy Kids and Totally Spies. Calvin's birthday gift, a spy tech kit, only heightened his status. Although most of it was flimsy plastic, one component, a compact spy radio with an earpiece and a button-sized microphone, was impressively built. Supposedly it could transmit audio over 5 miles, though in practice its clarity faded beyond 3. Calvin, I, and the rest of our gang spent the days before break testing its limits until its novelty wore off. Then Calvin proposed we put it to real use, for surveillance, with a perfect target in mind. On the last day before break, Calvin and I took an old brooch we'd found in his sister's jewelry box and carefully affixed the miniature radio to its back. We concealed our handiwork with a strip of velvet and reassembled the pin and clasp so that nothing appeared amiss. Nestled inside a small white box, it found a temporary home in my backpack. We agreed that I'd be the one to deliver it. Calvin's notorious reputation as a prankster made him an unreliable messenger. That afternoon, I slipped into the staff break room and found Ms. Harrow there, barely glancing up as I entered. Along one wall stood a row of cubbies labeled with staff names, all brimming with gifts and letters except one. "You can't be in here, kid," she grumbled. I swung my backpack off and retrieved the battered box. "I wanted to give you this before break," I said, extending it toward her. For a long moment, she stared at the box, setting aside her bag. Then she stepped forward, took it from my hand, and with deliberate care, shook it slightly before opening it. When she saw the brooch, she gingerly lifted it out and examined it. "It isn't new," I explained softly. "It used to be my mother's. She doesn't wear it anymore, but I thought you might like it." Her expression remained inscrutable as she ran her fingers over the glittering faux emerald. I half expected her to toss it aside, but instead, she offered a single, measured nod. "Thank you," she said quietly, and pinned the brooch onto her cardigan as if it were a treasure rather than a trinket. I managed a timid smile, but she said nothing more before dismissing me. Outside, Calvin was waiting near the woods. I gave him a thumbs up, and he slapped me on the back in congratulation. He pulled the earpiece from his backpack and held it between us. When I pressed it to my ear, I could hear the soft crunch of snow under Ms. Harrow's feet as she ambled through the trees. For several enchanted minutes, we listened in awe before racing back to my house to celebrate our success with steaming mugs of hot chocolate. Eventually, we decided the gadget should remain at my place. It was closer to where Ms. Harrow usually went, after all. In the days that followed, I began tuning in more frequently. No matter the hour, dawn, dusk, or the deep silence of night, Ms. Harrow's voice would fill the speaker. She spoke on every subject imaginable: the latest fashions, the stock market, the day's weather, even politics. Sometimes she prayed in a rush of apologies and broken promises. At other times, all I heard were soft sobs or rambling monologues that defied understanding. One day at the local grocery store, Calvin remarked, "A young woman just smiled at me. It was the sweetest thing." I replied, "Maybe, but have you ever listened to her talk? It's like she's speaking to someone, though she has no family or friends." Driven by curiosity, Calvin and I eventually decided to discover who, if anyone, was on the other end of her endless soliloquies. We had often noticed a ramshackle house at the edge of the southern woodlands, a small, isolated shack off a seldom-used road. Its weathered, cramped interior, barely enough for a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a single bathroom, convinced us that no one really lived there. "Maybe she's talking to someone," Calvin speculated. But as we peered from afar, too distant to see clearly yet too close to feel its ominous pull, we weren't sure. The idea of a witch, or even a lonely old woman losing her mind through isolation, sent shivers down our spines. After a few tense minutes of watching, Calvin grew impatient, and we turned to leave. Yet as we walked away, something compelled me to glance back. I saw Miss Harrow standing on the porch, her gaze fixed on us. I tugged Calvin's arm and whispered, "She's watching us." His eyes widened. Though he urged me to keep walking to avoid suspicion, once we were out of sight, we broke into a full sprint back home. Before long, our spy gadget became nothing more than a relic of childhood pranks, and Calvin's band shifted its focus to tormenting old Mr. Brenner, the cantankerous man who lived across from the school and shouted at us for any minor offense. Yet despite our youthful cruelty, I couldn't help but feel a pang of remorse every time I remembered how carefully Ms. Harrow had handled that brooch. Perhaps it was the only gift she'd received in years, a silent reminder that maybe she wasn't a witch or completely mad after all, but simply unbearably lonely. One chilly day in March, during a quiet lunch at the edge of campus, I found her sitting on a bench. I took the seat beside her. Without really meeting my eyes, she asked in a flat tone, "What do you want?" "Nothing," I murmured. "I just wanted to sit here." She picked at her sandwich and then said, "We're not exactly friends, you know." I nodded. "I know you don't have many friends." "Maybe someday," I added hopefully. To my astonishment, she laughed. A soft, unpracticed laugh that was genuine, if only for a moment. Before heading back to the school building, she even left a small bag of mini Oreos on the bench next to me, as if offering a quiet gesture of kindness. In the weeks that followed, I'd often check in on her by tuning into the earpiece. Sometimes it felt like she was talking directly to me, even if in truth I was intruding on a conversation meant only for herself. Then came Friday, May 17th, the 10th anniversary of Elias Harrow's death. I kept my eyes on Ms. Harrow throughout the day, but she showed no outward signs of sorrow. Perhaps I thought things were finally looking up for her. That evening, with my parents away for the week and me alone in the house, I switched on the earpiece expecting her familiar murmurs. Instead, her voice was different. More excited, almost breathless. Over and over she whispered, "Almost there, almost there, almost there," until at exactly 11:44 p.m., She cried out in a voice that resonated like a victorious chant. "It's done. It's done. Dark angel. Thank you, thank you. 10 years of solitude, and it was worth every second. Now, angel, bring him back. Bring him back to me." I strained to understand. Is this a song? A spell? Then her tone shifted, confused and broken. "What do you mean?" "No, I kept my promise. I followed every rule. I let no one in. I made no friends. I kept my wishes secret. Just as you told me, my angel." A sudden ripping sound cut through the transmission, the velvet backing of the brooch tearing away. Moments later, there was a sharp crash, like a door being flung open, and then nothing but silence. I sat in my bedroom, heart pounding, unsure of what had just transpired. Compelled by a growing dread, I crept downstairs to double-check that every door and window was locked. But even as I secured the house, I couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes upon me. Then, as the wind howled outside, a piercing wail reached my ears, a cry that echoed the anguish of a bereaved mother. Peering through the living room window, I saw her, the unmistakable silhouette of Ms. Harrow striding toward my house in a tattered white nightgown, eyes glazed and mouth agape. It was a scene plucked from my worst nightmares. I dove behind a couch as she neared the front porch, where she began pounding on the door with such force that each knock reverberated through the silence. I needed to call for help, but the old landline sat too close to the window where I hid. With every brutal strike, I prayed she wouldn't break through. Then, in a moment of terror, I caught sight of a pale face hovering inches from a side window. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and just as I did, a fist came crashing against the glass, shattering it into a spray of jagged shards. Amidst the chaos, I glimpsed a shotgun slung across her torso. Certain I was about to be overpowered, I yelled for her to leave me alone, but her reply was a cascade of questions I couldn't comprehend. The neighbors' dogs began barking furiously, and a porch light flickered on next door. Desperate, I scrambled for the phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling uncontrollably. Then, as suddenly as it began, her wailing faded into the night until all was silent. I stood there, paralyzed by shock, until the oppressive quiet finally settled. 2 weeks later, police discovered a body deep in the woods, hidden under a thick shroud of juniper, not far from the banks of the Westbridge River. The corpse was identified as Ms. Harrow, her face so disfigured it was unrecognizable, and a shotgun lay by her side. Strangely, no sign of the brooch was ever found. They say that although her body was stained with enough blood to attract every scavenger within miles, not a single creature dared approach it, not even insects or fungi, as if even the smallest beings recoiled from the presence of the lonely woman of Westbridge. Even now, years later, I sometimes switch on that old earpiece, half expecting to hear her soft, rambling voice. Instead, I'm left with echoes of a childhood where innocent curiosity blurred with unspeakable darkness, a reminder that some secrets once uncovered can haunt you forever.